I am going to get my lovely colleague Katie straight in here. And we are talking today about London's loo history. Oh, my iPad's falling over. London's loo history, toilets, all the kind of grubby stuff that kids like. Hi, Katie. Hi.
Hello. Morning. Oh, not morning. What am I talking about?
How are
Afternoon.
Can you hear me?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely. Yep, great. Perfect. Now,
Perfect.
I should say before we go any further, if anyone's got any kids watching, we are going to use one naughty word. It's not a really naughty word, but it's a little bit naughty, which we are going to use at some point a bit later. But that's okay. So you can either choose to carry on watching, but I promise you it's not going to be something
It's
really
historical
bad.
context.
It's historical. It's a historical rude word. This is my lovely colleague Katie, and Katie's a fellow Blue Badge Guide, and you qualified this year, didn't you? Bless you.
Just a few weeks ago, yeah.
Oh, and so kind of, hello, congratulations, you've got your badge. You now can't guide. But hey, you know, from frying pan into the fire or something like that. Anyway,
Something like that, yeah.
You're one of us now. But you have been doing guided tours for quite a number of years, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. Myself and a couple of colleagues, we have a sort of little personal passion project that we've been running for a few years now. We work with a lot of charities, and we work in quite an unusual sector of the industry. I think that's fair to say.
Yes, and I think everyone's probably got an idea about what that industry is, because
I'll just wave this around in case they haven't.
Yes, exactly. And I was just going to show a little picture of you. Here we go. On one of your loo tours. So you do loo tours around London.
That's right. We're called Loo Tours, lootours.com. And yeah, we specialise in the history of London sanitation, the history of public toilets, the history of toilets that we all have in our houses today. And it's a niche topic, but it's one that we think is important.
Actually, that's what we're going to do today. So where do we start then when we're talking about toilets? I guess we've got to go all the way back to the very beginning and talk about the Romans, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, toileting is, or has been, as you can imagine, an important part of human life for as long as humans have been on the planet, as long as any animals have been on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in early civilizations, most people would have used the river. Sort of communities start to spring up on the banks of rivers, and you needed to do your business. People started to understand there was something a little bit icky about it, and so they'd go down to the river, they'd do their business there, or they'd just go wherever they were. It was very organic.
Yeah.
The Romans in Britain really started to change all that. We know that they had actual toilets they built. We know that because there's some still in existence at Hadrian's Wall. And basically, if you know anything about the Romans, you might know that they enjoyed communal bathing. Well, they enjoyed communal toileting as well. Yes.
Hey, you know, if you're gonna go for it, you might as well go for the whole hog.
You might as well, mightn't you? You might as well. Nothing to hide from each other in Roman society. They were very open people, and particularly in the the Roman forts and things like that. You'd have gone inside. There would have been similar facilities in London, and you'd have found a room with a long, low stone bench around the outside, and a series of keyhole-shaped holes cut in it. Now, if you were very lucky, you had a servant or something like that, and you'd get them to sit down first and warm it up for you a little bit, because
very nice.
Certainly in the middle of winter here, it would be a little bit nippy, shall we say?
Yes, absolutely. Cold on the cheeks.
Exactly. And so you'd sit down, you'd do your business. You chat to your fellow soldiers or your fellow men and women. You know, hi Dave, how are you? How are the kids?
Yeah. All kind of squished in together on this one thing.
Exactly.
Cheek,
yes.
as it were.
Cheek to cheek. Exactly. Exactly. Possibly the worst element of this was that, of course, they had no toilet paper. Romans had not yet invented toilet paper. And so instead what they had was something called a terrarium, which was basically a sponge on a stick.
Ooh.
And
I'm guessing a communal sponge as well, right? Oh, have we lost you, Katie? Oh,
have you got me?
Oh, again, you're back.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Oh,
right. So so we got as far.
I got so excited.
So the stick. What happened to the stick?
The stick. Well, they would take the stick, they would dip it into the water of the toilets. And the toilets, by the way, were flushed with grey water from the Roman baths. So the water that overflowed, it would flush the toilets. Very green, very healthy. But they would dip this stick into the water, wipe themselves with it, and then lay it down for the next person to use. Very generous.
How wonderful.
Society.
Delicious. Absolutely delicious.
And they also, though, they were in other ways quite clean people. They washed their hands. That disappeared when the Romans left a few centuries later. They also actually had mouthwash as well, except you'll probably be disappointed to hear that it was their own urine that they used.
Oh, nice. Yes.
Mouthwash. Yes. Not
Lovely.
so nice.
Lovely. So, well, at the minute we're telling everybody to wash their hands. I wouldn't go down the mouthwash route. Let's not go that way.
No.
But we are all
no evidence that helps.
The Romans there.
no urine mouthwash for coronavirus. No, absolutely not. No.
So that's quite a good start then, I suppose, to some kind of hygiene. You know, we're talking 2,000 years ago. That's a decent start. I assume it gets better from there, does it?
Well, you'd like to think, wouldn't you? And unfortunately, things take a turn for the worse because, of course, the Romans were quite advanced in many ways in our modern way of thinking. They were very organised. They had central heating. They had very advanced society. When they left around about 410, when the empire starts to collapse, really toileting, good habits leaves with them. And we entered what became known as the lavatorial Dark Ages for hundreds of years. Not good at all. For hundreds of years. Really, we had no real substantial cleanliness surrounding toileting. Most ordinary people, you and I, we would just go wherever the will took us. We might have in the village a sort of communal cesspit that you would sort of squat over and do your business there. A lot of people had chamber pots. Yes, I know, lovely. A lot of people had chamber pots. You'd fill those up, and in the morning you'd open your windows, you'd say, "Oh, hello world," and you'd throw the contents of your chamber pot out into the street below for people to stroll around in.
Glorious.
Lovely. But if you were very wealthy, if you were very rich, you could afford something a little bit nicer. And usually that involved living in a castle somewhere. Perhaps you were a servant to one of the kings, or you were the king himself. You might have something called a garderobe. And this was something, a little room that would stick out from the castle wall, over the moat maybe, or over the cesspit, sometimes over the courtyard, I hate to say, and your waste would just drop nicely down from the side of the castle. Take it away.
Down the wall, into the courtyard.
Exactly, for the servants to trample around in, yeah.
Perfect. And garderobe, it comes from the French, doesn't it? Which literally means, well, it's where we get wardrobe from as well. It means literally to look after your clothes. Now, what on earth are the clothes doing in the toilet?
Well, good question. People actually, of course, the sort of the ammonia smell from urine and things like that was very, very strong. The fumes could be very, very potent. And actually, there was some evidence that people would deliberately dry and air their clothes near the toilet because the ammonia would kill the mites and the lice and things like that you might find on your clothes. So it was a way of sort of purifying your outfits. Aren't you glad we have dry cleaners today?
I can't imagine that, that would smell particularly brilliant. But I suppose if everyone, nobody's really showering or anything back then, everything's going to stink quite a lot. So I guess if you're, if it's a choice between having something vaguely stinky or something with loads of holes in and it's really scratchy, there we go. Cynthia says strong thighs needed. Yeah, absolutely, Sid. Definitely strong thighs for the sort of the squat and drop, if you like.
Strong stomachs too.
Strong stomachs, yeah, absolutely. I hope everyone watching has got a strong stomach as well.
Enjoying your tea and cakes, I hope, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Delicious. So we take a kind of a step back with these garderobes, but then obviously we develop up to here. So what's the kind of the next stage in, let's say, toilet development?
Well, of course, so you have the garderobes. The king himself would have had something a little bit nicer, perhaps. If anyone has been, yes, here it is. If anyone's been to Hampton Court, you might have seen this. This is the close stool, or the closed stool of King William III. So that is a royal toilet you're looking at there. Yes. Nice, you
royal
can see
bottoms
nice and
have
soft.
sat upon that lovely soft seat.
Royal bottoms, absolutely. And basically, it's nothing more than a chamber pot in a box. So to save you from the effort of emptying your chamber pot, if you were the king, you could have a sit down on that nice comfy seat, and you would have someone to talk to, because there was a role a few centuries before William, actually, but there was a role previously known as the groom of the stool. And he was someone who would stand by you if you were the king, ready to hand you a cloth or hay or moss or whatever it was he were using in those days, and he would chat to you. And this was actually someone of great importance. It sounds like a terrible job, groom of the stool, because he would be responsible for emptying the chamber pot afterwards, of course.
Yes, and checking on the health of the monarch as well, of course. Checking,
exactly.
Everything's sort of working. Okay.
Yeah, the first to know if there was, something amiss. And a very trusted position, because let's face it, if you're going to shut the door and be alone on your privy, if someone's going to be there with you, you want it to be someone you could trust, because anything could go on in that room. So these people were very important. It was a very important role, and they would be among the king's most trusted advisors. So who knows? We all know, we've all heard the legends of the epiphany toilet, the fact that great ideas come to you while you're sitting on the john. And of course, if you were the king, then you might have to tell these ideas to someone and turn to the person next to you and say, I've just had a fantastic idea. Why don't we do X, Y, Z? So they were very, very important advisors.
Yes, and it's sort of the medieval version of Facebook. You have an idea and instead of putting it on Facebook, you're going to tell. In fact, Cynthia just does that, checking your Facebook on the toilet. Yeah,
exactly. Doing the crossword, whatever it might be.
And of course, if we think back, the diets of these medieval kings, they're not what we today class a healthy diet. So, going to the loo is not necessarily going to be an easy task at all times.
No.
So that groom of the stool is there for a little bit of moral support as well.
There's actually an incredible little letter written by one of Henry VIII's grooms of the stool, where he records that the king, after having consumed a lot of laxatives, awoke at 2 a.m., used the stool, and he described the stool as being under great siege, which I think paints a lovely picture for you of just exactly what this experience was like for many of these poor people.
That's hilarious.
But it was actually around Henry VIII's time that we started to move, believe it or not, into the world of modern toilets, because it was a few years after Henry's death, when his daughter Elizabeth I was on the throne, that our very first flushing toilet was invented. Yes. Now, this is something that's often misattributed. People often think that a gentleman called Thomas Crapper was the inventor of the toilet. That, I'm sorry to tell you all, is not the case. We'll talk about him in a few moments.
Absolutely rubbish. And this is where I should point out, for anybody watching with kids, this is where we're going to get a couple of occurrences of that slightly naughty word. Nothing too bad, but a slightly naughty word. So
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. But he was not responsible for inventing the flushing toilet. It was actually a man called John Harrington, Sir John Harrington. Oh, sorry, there's Thomas Crapper.
Yep. Sorry, that's Thomas
there
Crapper.
He is. No, that's all right.
Oh, it's not worked.
There he is. Oh, no.
We can't quite see him. Anyway,
I'll
tell you what, let's do this way. There we go. There he is.
There we go. There he is. Good old John Harrington. Quite a ruff he's got on there. Nice little beard as well. And he was actually the godson of Queen Elizabeth. He had been banished from court, apparently, for telling risque stories. And he went out to Bath and he built himself a nice house. And one of the things he built in that house in the 1580s was a flushing toilet, which he nicknamed Ajax. I think that I
really?
have no concept why. That's just the name he decided. I mean, people like to name things. He named his toilet Ajax.
That's fantastic.
It was a very complicated design, lots of levers and weights and pulleys and things like that, but it flushed with water. The first example we know of this happening. And he was later visited, when he was forgiven, by his godmother, Queen Elizabeth. He showed her very proudly this toilet that he had created. She loved it, and he made one for her as well. But it never caught on. And the idea kind of died out with the two of them until the 18th century.
And then what happens in the 18th century? This is when we get, actually quite a big event, don't we? And stupidly, I meant to get a picture and I completely forgot
that's all right.
The Great Exhibition, which happened in 1851.
That's right. In 1851, the exhibition comes along. A little bit before that, though, in 1775, we actually had the very first patent for a flushing toilet. That was a man called Alexander Cummings, a man who everybody has forgotten, poor chap. But he was the man sort of officially responsible for inventing the flushing toilet in the more modern age. But in the 1850s, as you quite rightly say, there was this incredible Great Exhibition. And by the way, if anyone is interested, the Royal Parks have got a little virtual tour of the Great Exhibition that you can go on their website, which is great fun. And they mention in that tour the toilets, because it was decided by a man called George Jennings, who for me is the great hero of the toileting world. He was a pioneer. He was a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. He was a toilet manufacturer, plumber, and he said, I'm going to open some toilets at the Great Exhibition. That's what the people want.
Now, we should explain what the Great Exhibition was. So this was huge in Hyde Park. a massive, as the name suggests, exhibition. And it was basically, it was sort of masterminded by Prince Albert, who was Queen Victoria's husband, along with a whole other load of people, but he was one of the masterminds of it. And it was this huge exhibition to show that England was up to speed with everything kind of technological developments, and that they weren't falling behind in technology and physics and all that kind of stuff. So it was an amazing, that they built this huge crystal palace, so a Victorian palace made out of glass, and it was filled with, everything, from woodworking to, just literally everything, all sorts of design things, and it was absolutely amazing. But this is where we get the first public toilets in England.
Absolutely, yeah. Nestled in among the Kohinoor diamond, that was one of the things on the display. You could see every stage of cotton manufacturing. There were steam engines, there was all sorts of incredible stuff. And nestled away to the side were some toilets. The first public flushing toilets in the country. And he was largely mocked for this idea. Everybody said to him, because remember, the Victorians were prudish people in the 19th century. They didn't like to talk about going to the toilet. They referred to it as having to wash one's hands. And everybody said, no one's going to go to the Great Exhibition just to use your toilets, George. But he persevered with the idea. He opened a series of cubicles where you could pay 1 penny. And that is, in fact, where we get the phrase spending a penny from today.
Yeah, my grandma always used to use that phrase. She loved it.
It's something that's still very much used today. But you didn't just get to use a cubicle for your penny. You also got a hot cloth, a comb, and a shoe shine for your penny as well. So this was
very good value,
luxury experience. Yeah, absolutely. Penny, of course, was a lot more money in those days than it is today. Yeah. But it was this wonderful thing. He raised.
And am I right in thinking it was men only?
No, it wasn't men only, actually. There were, but highly, highly unusual, because female public toilets remained very much a contentious subject for a long time. There were female toilets, but actually the majority of the money that he raised £2,441. Most of that came from the women, because he only charged to use a cubicle. So for using a urinal, that was free. So actually, most of that money was generated by women, but it very quickly became something frowned upon, and women would have to battle for a long time to get their own public toilets after men received theirs. So it was a contentious issue. That's certainly true.
Something we still have problems with today, having enough ladies' loos in toilets and everything.
I know, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so it was something that was hugely popular. It was visited during the 6 months of the exhibition by 827,280 people.
Goodness,
he made
amazing.
a huge fortune. And after the exhibition closed, he persuaded them to keep the toilets running at the exhibition's new site. He made £1,000 a year from those toilets. And eventually, in about 1854, although the date is contested, London got its very first permanent flushing public toilets in the underground outside the Royal Exchange.
There we go. And are they still active today?
Unfortunately not, no. London has had a huge number of closures of public toilets. The underground, lots and lots of stations used to have their own, and I think it's fewer than 20% of the underground stations now have public toilets.
Gosh, yeah. Well, that's one thing that we miss in London is free to pee.
Absolutely. Something that was very close to our hearts here at Lutors. It's one of the reasons my colleague had the idea in the first place.
Yeah, a very good idea. So we should come on to this chap here then, shouldn't we? Let me just
absolutely, yeah. There he is, the great man, Thomas Crapper. You can see his very lovely signature at the bottom there. He was an extraordinary man, not, as I say, responsible for inventing the toilet. He did invent a number of quite interesting parts of toilets. He invented the floating ballcock valve. He invented the U-bend. He even invented, so to speak, sort of manhole covers and things like that. He was an innovator. He was improving designs as he went along. But really, he became famous because of his personality. And we always talk about how there's no such thing as bad publicity. Well, as I mentioned, in the 19th century, when Thomas Crapper came along, right at the end of that period, people were still very prudish about toileting. People didn't like to talk about it. If you were going to have a toilet installed in your house, and from about 1848, there was a Public Health Act which said that every new house had to have a toilet. You wouldn't go down to B&Q and buy yourself a toilet. You wouldn't put in an order. Instead,
although I love that idea of the Victorian men, Victorian men going off on their, their huge bicycles.
The women in their corsets.
Yeah, exactly. I love that idea.
No, I don't like this one, darling. No, it was very a shameful experience to have to put in your order for a toilet. So it was very secretive. You sort of looked at samples that were sent to your house, and it was all very hush hush. Thomas Crapper was not a hush-hush kind of a guy. And he bought up one of the biggest showrooms on the King's Road in Chelsea. He filled the windows from floor to ceiling with sanitary wares. And apparently this was so shocking at the time that fancy ladies would faint walking past at the sight of all these terrible things in the window.
They weren't very hardy, fancy ladies back then. They fainted at the slightest thing, didn't they?
It was all those corsets. It was squeezing the air out of them, poor things. Exactly. So he became notorious, shall we say, because of this. And for him, all of this was happening at a time when toileting was becoming more and more part of the public imagination. People were starting to realise the importance of these things. London was getting its big sewers. And most significantly, issues surrounding toileting were affecting the rich as well as the poor. In particular, typhoid, cholera, diseases like that. Very famously, it was considered that Prince Albert had died of cholera in 1861. Yep. We're not entirely sure about that diagnosis now, but that's what they thought at the time. And his son, Prince Edward Bertie, he became ill with typhoid as well. And for a long time, the nation was very much sort of caught up in this drama. Was the heir to the throne going to survive this terrible disease? And at the same time, people were becoming aware, okay, if the poor are sick, the rich can get sick too. And, you know, maybe we need to start doing making some changes here. Prince Edward survived. There was a huge Thanksgiving service at St. Paul's Cathedral. George Jennings, our friend from before, was there overseeing all the public toilet arrangements. And as a result, Edward became pretty interested in toileting. Unfortunately, George Jennings died shortly afterwards in a karting accident. But in the 1880s, Edward bought Sandringham, and he turned to the most famous toilet manufacturer in all the world, Thomas Crapper, and asked him to fill Sandringham with public toilets. And that is why Thomas Crapper became so famous.
And this is one of the Thomas Crapper toilets. And we should say as well that the company is still going.
It is.
And you were saying that there were some Thomas Crapper toilets up at the new Coal Drops Yard up at King's Cross, which is actually a perfect name for someone. Coal Drops Yard. And,
actually, just inside the station, so actually within King's Cross Station complex, there are some. Lots of people come up to me and say, oh, I found these incredible Thomas Crapper Victorian toilets in London. And I often have to say to people, there are very few examples of real Victorian Thomas Crapper toilets. There's one in Wesley's Chapel, which I think we'll talk about in a moment. Yeah. But there's lots of reproductions around because the company still exists and they specialise in Victorian reproduction toilets. So at the Parcel Yard pub in King's Cross Station, they have repro toilets in there. They had them in a lot of Jamie's Italian restaurants for a while. And what you're showing us there is one of the old adverts for Thomas Crapper's toilets. You can see that beautiful design. I mean, the Victorians really were very stylish people.
They were.
They were. They made everything beautiful. It didn't matter if it was a room to do your business in. It had to look perfect.
And I always love the chains as well. There's something quite nice about the chain.
Yes. And actually, some of Crapper's toilets have got beer pull handles. So they're big handles, like pulling a pint that you use to flush them. The ones in King's Cross.
Oh, yes, I know the ones you mean. They've got on the actual system. Oh,
yeah, very satisfying.
And one of the big things that people think about Thomas Crapper is that his name is what gave us the, now, parents, if you've got kids watching, the slightly naughty word crap. And actually, that's not true, is it?
No, we don't think so. The word existed a long time before, actually. It's in Middle English, and it means chaff, the piece of wheat that's sort of separated and thrown away during harvest. It's basically synonymous with the rubbish that you throw away. And we think for a while it was used to mean excrement in England, but we think it possibly fell out of use. None of this is known for certain. And there is actually a belief that by the time Thomas Crapper came along, his name wouldn't have been funny to him or to anyone else. And that's why he was so happy to put it on all his toilets. And that it was only in later years, we think possibly from influence from America, where the word continued to be used to mean excrement, that it came back and people found all these Victorian toilets with the word crapper written on them, thought it was hysterical and sort of repopularised the term. But he did not coin it, so to speak.
Oh, well, there we go. So now, before we finish, I should ask you some of your favourite toilets in London. And you did mention very briefly the Wesley toilets, which are these ones here.
That's right.
With the Wesley Chapel.
That's right. And these are genuine Victorian Thomas Crapper toilets. It's just inside the museum. As you go in the door, they're just inside there. What you're seeing there are the urinals. You can see they were much more classy items in those days. In the 1890s, these were put in. But there's also original Victorian sort of seats and toilets and sinks and everything. It's incredibly beautiful. And I highly recommend going to see the museum and the house anyway. But if you stop there, don't miss the toilets, because they're very, very rare these days to find loos that old.
Yeah, absolutely. And what other toilets would you say are one of your favourites? There's one. It's not our favourite loos, but this is your career. This is what you do. So
this is what I do. Yeah,
which is quite fun. Is the one at the Jubilee Gardens near Waterloo, which is called the Jubilee.
That's right. That's right, the Jubilee, London's most patriotic toilet. It's just along the river from the London Eye, so if you're in that area, you should see it. The architecture of the building actually is incredible. It's by the architect Mark Powers. I won't tell you what it's meant to look like. I'll let you go down for yourselves and see if you can figure it out. But it's patriotic loo seats. One of my colleagues is American at Loo Tours, and she always says, the British are the only people who can put their flag on a toilet seat and think that's patriotic. But there's flags on bins, there's flags on mirrors, we've got portraits of the Queen, and it is a unisex complex as well. So there's individual cubicles, there's no men's, no women's, it's all one and the same, but there is a sort of urinal section for the blokes as well.
Oh, fantastic. And there's one of your other favourite ones is Sketch, and I'm desperately trying to find a picture, but I don't think it's downloaded correctly, which is a bit frustrating. I'm just seeing if I've got it on my phone. Because Sketch one's kind of interesting because it is it's basically it's sort of pods, isn't it?
That's right. It's often known as the egg toilet, and if you can't get the image up, don't you worry, because we're all on Instagram as we speak. If you just type into Instagram Sketch toilets,
here we go.
Or
I'm
even
just
good toilets.
Hold that up there. I don't know if you can quite see
there it
that.
is. Let's see. Don't know if you can figure that out, guys, but have a little look of it on Instagram, because I would say they are the most Instagrammed toilets. They certainly in London, possibly in the world.
It is on the, if you look on my Instagram, the post that I did with the menu for this week, if you swipe right, there's a picture of it there, but it didn't seem to download for some reason. So yeah, but they're amazing, aren't they? They're kind of like little alien pods that you go in. It's quite mad.
They're incredible. It's sort of half art gallery, half toilet, really. There's sort of, crazy lights. Each pod sort of plays different sounds and music. It's sort of quite a strange experience. There's a member of staff dressed as a Victorian maid on hand to help you if you get lost or confused. It really is a sort of an experience. And yes, in some ways, I think kind of shares that heritage with the Victorians wanting to make everything beautiful and interesting and something to be proud of. I think this idea of modern toilets being quirky and cool is kind of carrying on that tradition, because if we don't care about our toilets, we'll lose them. Exactly.
And so it's just like a really weird question, but what's the future of toilets?
Now, the future of toilets, without a doubt, is something called changing places. And this is something that's very close to our hearts at Loo Tours. And yes, wonderful. You've got a picture of it there. These toilets are actually at Windsor Castle, believe it or not. They've just opened these. They cost them about £2 million to install. And changing places are toilets that are designed to cater for people who are so severely disabled that they are unable to take care of their own toileting. So as you can see, there's plenty of room in there. There is an adult-sized changing table, and there's a hoist that's able to lift someone from a wheelchair onto that table. Because we are all in life constrained by what academics refer to as the bladder leash, how far we can go from home before we have to go to the toilet. Yeah. And those of you with small children or elderly relatives, or even anyone who's just had a dodgy curry on a Friday night, you all know how important it is to get to a toilet when you need one. And if you're someone who needs somebody else's assistance to go to the toilet, then you cannot use ordinary toilets, and therefore you cannot have a good day out. So it's becoming more and more important in the future that we create things like this.
Modesty screens as well, aren't there?
Oh yeah, modesty screens too.
And you actually see they've got the Windsor Castle. Yeah, on the front.
Yeah.
The Windsor Castle's just undergone this massive kind of redesign for a whole section of it. So that's fab that they put that in. It's something the government is trying to push as well. These changing places toilets, and potentially to have it in law that any time public toilets are built that there has to be one of these, which I think is only a good thing, because it will mean that there's so much more freedom for people who sometimes really lack the ability to kind of get out and about on their own and worry about these things. So Corinne's saying changing places also do great mobile facilities at festivals as well.
They
I
do
didn't know that.
They do, yeah, absolutely.
Richard's saying there's some great loos in the Princess Louise pub on High Holborn.
Yes, we feature that in one of our tours. Yes, we do. Yeah, grade 2 listed. Just the
Straight to
gents, I'm
toilets.
afraid. Yeah, and this
Oh.
is, again, a sort of similar thing with the ladies. So the Methodist chapel we were just talking about, that's only the gents as well. And Princess Louise, it's only the gents. But at the Methodist chapel, sorry, they do let women in. They say you can pop in and have a look as long as you're discreet and well behaved. But yes, so usually, unfortunately, as we were saying, it's only the gents who have these beautiful old toilets.
Oh, fab. And someone's saying the office where they work has got a chain as well. One of our colleagues, Craig, is going to go and check out the toilets.
Please do.
Yeah, Richard says he tells his guests, if you find a public toilet, use it. If you find a free one, use it twice. Very, very good good advice there, Richard.
Absolutely. Yeah,
just having a look to see if there's any other questions about toilets for...
I can see someone's asked the best toilet view. That is without a doubt the toilets in the Shard.
In the Shard, yeah.
Right at the top of the Shard, yeah, absolutely. And actually, if anyone's been up there, they have see-through floor-to-ceiling walls. So you can sit on the toilet, sort of drop your trousers and, you know, get a wonderful view out over London. You just have to worry about low-flying helicopters and window cleaners and things like that. But it's very liberating.
The only problem with that once, they don't have any loos that don't have that view. And I took some guests there once, and the lady, the mum, was she was absolutely terrified of heights. And it was awful. It was just the most traumatic experience for her to kind of go for a pee above, you know, one of the tallest buildings in Europe. And bless her, it was really, really tough. But yeah, the view is incredible.
You do sort of have to close your eyes to it a little bit.
You do. You have to make sure that you've got your height legs on. Otherwise, it all gets a bit grim. Well, listen, Katie, I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
An interesting chat on toilet history of London, and there is another talk that we're probably going to do at some point about sort of sewage systems and things, which sounds really weird, but loads of guys love the sewage system because it's so cool and so interesting. Yeah. So we're going to do that on another day. But thank you so much for joining me. I will be back tomorrow at 3:00 for Women's Wednesdays. We're going to be talking about Dorothy Lawrence tomorrow, who's a name that probably most people will not have heard of, which is how I like it on a Women's Wednesday. And then on Thursday, we've got Sarah Chiachi coming in as our art historian to talk a bit about artists in London. And Friday, just about nailing what is happening on Friday. So I'll get that out to you soon. So there we go. Thank you so much, Katie. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Take care,
see you soon.
And keep toileting on.
Will do, absolutely.
All right. Bye.
Bye.